So hi, I'm Yvonne and I'm talking about the topic of certification, which was also briefly mentioned by Richard, thankfully, in his presentation, as they are currently working on the DSA, as I understood, which is cool because that's part of my presentation as well. First, I'll give you some general information about certification, and I will focus on the Nestor seal, which is the second step. We have already handed in all of the stuff they asked for in March and are now curiously awaiting the findings and the questions that might occur. Then I will focus on criteria details having to do something with Rosetta. So we need some information about how Rosetta is working and how we at our institution are using Rosetta to document for the Nestor seal. And of course, there's a conclusion as well. Why are we interested in certification at all? Well, it's pretty important to build trust, not only for stakeholders or your customers, but also for workmates. That might sound strange, but sometimes my workmates don't really know what I do the whole day. Some people think I'm just toying around because we have a dark archive, so they don't really see what I'm doing. They just know that I frequently ask them for their content. When can I archive your content? And they are like, well, it's already backed up every night, so what are you talking about? So sometimes it's useful when they have more information about digital presentation and see some official thing like a Nestor seal or the data seal of approval to understand why this is important for us as an institution and why it is important for me that they finally let me archive their content. And of course, it's very useful for funding. If you can show them here, we are already certified. We are good at it. We really know what we're doing. Of course, during the certification process, there always seem to be gaps being detected only because we try to document our workflows, and a little bit peer pressure. Not so much with the Nestor seal yet, but the data seal of approval, when we applied for it 2 years ago, there were already almost 40 institutions with a data seal, and as of today, there are more than 60. So it's sort of standard in Europe to have the data seal of approval at least. Of course, it's much work. And most of the work isn't so interesting because sometimes you can't even answer it yourself. I already mentioned we have a dark archive, so all the questions related to access, I have to go to my workmates and say, well, can you please fill this out for me? Can you please read through this? I really need your help. And of course, that, that needs some time. Yes, and in case of the Nestor seal, it's like, I don't know why this kept happening. There are only 2 institutions yet who have already certified themselves with the Nestor seal. And as most of the documentation they handed in isn't publicly available, you can't really copy from it. It's really difficult. With the data seal of approval, it was better because there were already 40 when we applied, and we really could look at the documentations and then decide for ourselves how much detail we wanted to give, and so that was really thankful. The Nestor seal has 34 criteria, which is a lot, and you have to get full points for the first 12, which are also the most difficult ones. As you can see, it's about money, it's about stuff, it's about legal aspects. So all the things you have to go to your boss and ask her to go to her boss to get the answers. So I couldn't really do it myself, well, not all the criteria at least. And you really can't leave out anything. You really have to answer everything. With the other criteria, it's a little bit better. You can leave out them if they're not applicable for you, for example, if you run a dark archive. Or, and it's a little bit more technical, so you don't have to go to the boss of your boss of your boss to get approval for every answer you're giving, because usually it's not that confidential. And usually, well, I could do most of it, not all. But of course, this really touches the Rosetta workflows a lot. I had a discussion with a workmate of the TIB, which we are working closely together with, because she more or less thinks all of the 34 criteria somehow touch Rosetta. And of course, depending on how you are working with Rosetta in your digital preservation archive, this might be true. But of course, there are some criteria which really are closely related to the workflows of Rosetta, so I focused on them and listed them here. And maybe we can't talk about every one of them, each one of them, but don't worry, the slides will be published afterwards. And of course, you can always ask me, even weeks from now when we are all back in our offices. So I always have one sentence to summarize what the criteria is asking for, what kind of answer. So access is, of course, that authorized users, so sometimes not everybody, but only certain people, can access and find the content and view it. And the conditions of use, of course, have to be transparent for them. We don't really could answer that so good with Rosetta because, well, dark archive, but of course you can focus on the viewers available on Rosetta, how to link to objects and access rights. We know the access right management tool in Rosetta is pretty extensive and you can do all sorts of stuff. So that's a good way to answer this criteria. Interpretability, this is really a big focus of our institution as we are very much into preservation planning. And of course, then we have to go, okay, we do the metadata extraction, format identification, validation, risk management, and then the preservation planning is built onto that. So that was a really long answer for us, I think like 2 pages or so, to really describe what Rosetta can do and what we are currently doing with our objects. Funding was a mess, of course, because almost all the numbers are confidential. And of course, the Nestor serial reviewers, they want to have something. Luckily, we could leave out all the money we used to pay for Rosetta years ago, because that's in the past. But we had to talk about annual costs. And then we thought, and we did the thing, we listed all stuff that cost us money a year, and then just gave the sum. And we didn't tell anybody the summons, and only within our institution. And of course, we couldn't let that be published afterwards, so the reviewers have to keep this information for themselves. But at least they know it's funded and it's secure, and we will fund that next year and then the year after that, which is really why they want to know that, because sometimes digital preservation is only a project and it's done after 2 years or so, and that's not really, well, that's not good for digital preservation, of course. Organization and processes really focuses a lot of all the modules you know from the OAIS module. So we really went into the detail describing the different modules and how we are using them in our digital preservation workflows. Of course, very much focusing on ingest and preservation planning. Preservation measures also is, well, a very big task for us. And so we really went into detail what is being done during ingest. And I think this is pretty similar for most Rosetta customers, as is all is out of the box, explaining to the reviewers what is done to ensure fixity and how to get the technical metadata and what to do if something fails and what the exact tasks of the technical analyst are to just deal with all the exceptions that occur while ingesting data. And we have built a plugin if metadata changes, which we described as well. And we have one preservation planning workflow yet. We are currently working at the second one, and we describe that as well. And Preservation Watch, like what we are doing now, just talking to the whole world who's doing the same things, to show that we are not like this, like just staying in the office and doing the things as we have always done that, but really looking what is the best practice out there, talking to other people. This is really bad. This is like the last will. What happens after your institution will be dead? Nobody wants to talk about that. It's not really funny to go to your boss and ask that. The technical side is nice with Rosetta because you can always export the objects somewhere else. Of course, you don't want to do that manually because it's a mess. So you certainly have to build something like a dismission application, which, as I am aware of, nobody has done yet. And the organizational thing, well, okay, we don't really have a last will at our institution. I don't know about you, but we try to tell the reviewers, okay, if we will not be there one day, we will make sure that at least the data survive. And we hope they will believe us. I will let you know. And then there are so many questions about technical details and really broken down to the very tiniest things like integrity, asking for ingest, access, why the objects are in storage, and we really try to break it down and tell them, okay, they are checksums, and they are all in the mets, and you can always be sure, and you can always run it again to make sure that the object fixity hasn't been broken yet. And talking about the software development kit, we're using extensively to build several submission applications, I think 4 so far, to get the objects safely into Rosetta. And what is done when we are working with the objects within Rosetta, always keeping the original file, of course, never losing them, and if we are altering something, always having all the metadata about these preservation plans within Rosetta, keeping that everybody will be able to understand what we actually have done to the objects maybe after I'm retired. So really have to build trust toward the reviewers here. Well, we don't have a user interface, so I said it's not applicable for us, hoping that they will accept that. We really only have downloaded objects for test purposes yet. And I wasn't really willing to invent a workflow in my head just to answer this criterion, so let's just wait and see. But of course, if you do use Rosetta as a light archive, you have to really go into the detail with the user interface. And then all the same questions you have with integrity are asked for authenticity, so you have to go all over again. And always keep the original files, of course. The same is true for the preservation measures and use. You have possibility to evaluate a preservation plan within Rosetta and document everything. You can export all the objects and the metadata, and we always be able to retrace all the changes. So that's very important here. So does this work? I think so. I can always jump to conclusion because I thought, oh, this is much too long. There are too many criteria, so I can always do that. Is there still time? Okay, that's good. I want them to be able to ask questions as well. So you have all the things about the IEPs here, and the persistent identifier we have already came across, and the metadata. That's my own. You only have 5 minutes left stuff. So I think I want to have more time for questions, so I just jump to the conclusion. It's really possible to have the Nestor certification when you're using Rosetta. Of course, it depends on how you use it and how your workflows are. And sometimes the documentation isn't there yet, which is a big chunk of the work, like having all the preservation policies, And if the web presentation platforms are not Rosetta, of course you have to document them as well, and you might need the help of your legal colleagues as well. The Rosetta documentation is sufficiently available. Of course, it would be a little better if there would be more, especially like a summary which is understandable for people who have never seen Rosetta before, because sometimes it's pretty abstract for them. And not all the reviewers really know Rosetta by heart like we do. There are some really useful videos for ingest and data management. Something like this yet is lacking for preservation planning and risk management, but maybe that will rise soon. So I guess, yes. You have English comments for the Nestor seal. It's really pretty well documented. One of the applicants has answered the questions in English as well, so you can always look at it and think about themselves. And of course, you can ask me questions now or later. Yeah, I think I know what you mean. Okay, I think there are like 6 criteria out of the whole ones that are organizational only, so I think it's mostly technical. But of course, it depends on how you use Rosetta. So of course, more documentation, Nestor seal ready would be useful, but that would make your life easier, but you couldn't skip all the work because your preservation plan just uses plugins you might have built yourself and tools you have built yourself or bought yourself. So that's always very individual still. But well, of course, as we are gaining experience with the Nestor seal, several Rosetta customers, TIB is about to hand in their documents as well, Rosetta customers. So we can, of course, make life easier for you if you go for it 1 year from now or so.
Thank you.
Any questions? Thanks.
Thanks, Yvonne. And just regarding your question, so indeed, Nestor at the end is certification for not for the system, but for the organization. So it's just Yvonne said, it's about organization, about the policies, about how you're actually handling Rosetta. Definitely, as more and more Rosetta customers will be certified with this seal, it'll be easier for others at least to go over some of the parts. And we are definitely planning to provide more videos specifically on the preservation, the places you've mentioned. Training videos of this part definitely are on our plans.